If you think Al ducking out, you ain't heard Al.
Welcome to Boys in the Hood TV. Today we're going to be discussing the life of Lil Al from the Southside Compton Crips. Now, Lil Al was born Michael DeRoe Jr. in 1974 in Compton, California. Now, his pops was from Watts. He was heavy into the streets, and he was a member of the notorious bounty hunter Watts. Now, as a kid, his father was constantly in and out of his life due to being in jail and in prison. Now, Michael's mother would always take him to visit his grandmother and father in the Nickerson Garden projects every chance that she could get. Now, as an infant, his mother had a best friend named Charlotte Anderson, who had a son named Orlando, who she would always bring around. Now, Michael and Orlando would soon become best friends as kids, and they would hang out all the time. Now, sometime during the summer, Orlando's mother would stay at Michael's grandmother's house in the Nickerson Gardens, because at this point in time, they had become like one big family. Now, as a kid, Michael would attend Emerson Elementary in Compton, and he was overall a good kid who got good grades. Now, in 1984, his father would get parole from prison, but soon this happy reunion would turn sour. In March of 1985, a man would be shot and killed in the Nickerson Garden projects, and his father, along with two other men, will be arrested for this murder. Now, it will be proven that his father was not the shooter, but he would ultimately will be found guilty, and he will be sentenced to life in prison. Now, his mother at the time continued to work hard to provide for him, and she was a property officer working for the Compton PD. Now, seeing how his father fell victim to the streets by getting locked up, she would try her best to keep him away from that gang life. But in the 80s, the violence in Compton was already running high, and it was plagued with it. Now, Michael's close relationship with Orlando would soon lead to him becoming cool with Orlando's uncle named Keefy D, who was a notorious Southside Crip. Now, the Southside Compton Crips were one of the most active sets in Compton. Now, Keefy D was a known dope boy and a known hustler who was always about getting his money. Now, at around the age of 15, both Michael and Orlando would be drawn in to the street life, and they would start looking to get put on to the Southside Compton Crips. But for this to happen, they would need to prove themselves to the OGs of Southside. So this initiation will be for them to shoot at police officers. So one night, two well-known detectives in Compton stopped at a McDonald's on Long Beach Boulevard to get something to eat. Now, directly behind this McDonald's is one of the known kicking spots for the Southside Compton Crips. Now, Michael, Orlando, and another team by the name of Lavelle Moore had watched as the Compton PD had put into the McDonald's. Now, soon after both officers pulled out and turned back on to Long Beach Boulevard, a prostitute would approach their car to give them information. Now, while they're talking to this prostitute, only a few seconds later, gunshots will be heard, and they will be firing straight at the police cruiser. Now, the car will be struck and riddled with bullets as the officers would duck and try to flee for their lives. Now, once the shooting has stopped, both officers will hop out the car, and witnesses will tell both of them that they saw a group of black men running down the street. So Compton PD would canvass the area, and they would head back towards that McDonald's, and they would start searching the home behind the McDonald's building. And once inside, they would find Michael, Orlando, and Moore all hiding. Now, all three teens would be arrested. Now, while in custody, Lavelle Moore would take the fall, admitting to the police that he was the lone shooter and that neither Orlando or Michael had anything to do with it. So this would lead to both Michael and Orlando being released. Both Michael and Orlando would get put on to the South Side, and Michael would start going by Lil Al. Now, in a matter of no time, Lil Al would start getting into a lot of trouble and find himself being arrested back and forth by Compton PD. Now, it would become a regular occurrence to this point where the officers will go pick up Al's mother from home and take her down to the station so that she can sign him out and get him released out of lockup. Now, Compton PD would describe Al as one of the most ruthless and one of the most sinister Compton Crips. Now, the 80s, the drugs were being flown in, and it was one of the main sources of income for anybody, whether you were Pirus or a Compton Crip at the time. And both Al and Orlando would start selling dope with Big Keefy D and the rest of the Pirus clique, including Freaky Dre and also Bubble Up. Now, by the 90s, both Compton and LA would have a lot of homicides, which would include both young black males and young Hispanic males. Now, Lil Al at this time would be super active in the streets, from slanging to banging. But in 1991, Al will find himself being arrested for being in possession of an assault weapon. Now, because this was considered a wobbler charge, the prosecution would only charge him with a misdemeanor. But this wouldn't be Al's only time having a run-in with the law as an adult. He wasn't only slinging dope, but he would start robbing. And not long after this, he would be arrested on grand theft charges and also receiving stolen property. And on November 27, 1993, Al will be involved in a 211, which he would later be arrested in January of 1994. He would find himself sitting down for a while behind the walls, but eventually he would be back out on the streets, and he would link back up with his homie, Baby Lane, and they would grow even closer than before. And anywhere that you saw Baby Lane, you were more than likely to see Al, and vice versa. Now, as the violence continued throughout Compton, Al's name would start being attached to a lot of alleged murders, according to Compton PD. Now, a lot of this violence would eventually start to stem from an internal beef between the Southside Compton Crips, which involved the narcotics business. And Lil Al would find himself right in the middle of it. Now, one day in Compton, Lil Al was kicking it with a man by the name of Lee Banner, a business partner of Keefy D, when suddenly out of nowhere, gunshots could be heard and AK bullets would start ripping through the house and tearing through the windows. Now, Lee Banner would be hitting multiple times with the AK, and he would die at the scene. Now, it would later be revealed that the shooters were from Southside, which included Damon Long and another man by the name of Charles Johnson, AKA Snake. Now, allegedly, Bubble Up from Southside Compton Crips and Lee Banner had stole $20,000 from Charles Johnson. So this shooting was considered payback. But Damon Long and Charles Johnson were not done yet. Just a short time after this shooting, Bubble Up from Southside would be at Keefy D's house, and he would be shot 7 times with an AK and barely survived with his life. Now, these two shootings will cause a big rift between the Southside Compton Crips. Now, although Lil Al was not the intended target, he was in that house when the shooting happened. And Lil Al had nothing but revenge on his mind. Now, in 1995, Lil Al and Baby Lane will be riding through Compton at the intersection of Glencoe and Temple when they would spot another Southside Crip, Damon Long, who was responsible for the shootings. And that's when Baby Lane would pull up and Lil Al would lean out the window with his 4.5 and start blasting. He would let off multiple shots, killing Damon Long. Now, immediately after this murder, Lil Al would flee Compton and lay low in Vegas. Now, a witness would identify Al as the shooter and Baby Lane as his accomplice. Now, the police would get an arrest warrant for Lil Al, but they would not be able to find him. But eventually, he would be captured out in Las Vegas and would be extradited back to Compton to stand trial for this murder. But eventually, this trial would completely fall apart because the eyewitness will completely retract their statements out of fear from the Southside Compton Crips. So Lil Al would only be charged with violating his probation, and he would be sentenced to 1 year in prison. Now, this murder will only up Al's street cred a lot, and even his big homie Keefy D would start to refer to Lil Al as the Reaper. And as he put it, a cold-ass nigga that earned his name. Now, while locked up, his homie Baby Lane would be accused of murdering a Palmer Block Crip named EB. But not only was he accused of that murder, he would be accused of murdering Tupac Shakur later that year in Las Vegas. Now, eventually by 1997, Lil Al would get released and he'd be back on the streets and link back up with Baby Lane. Now, by 1998, drama would start to stir up when one of Al's homie named Freaky Dre was owed $3,000 from a pocket Crip OG known as Daniel Smith, aka D, who had been dodging him. Now, Freaky Dre would tell Daniel Smith that the price just went up from $3K to $7,000. And if he didn't have his money, it was gonna be over with. Now, this beef would start to cause a rift between the Southside Compton Crips and the Pocket Hood Crips, who at the time had a very close, tight alliance. Now, on May 29th, 1998, Baby Lane would get the bad news that his grandmother had just died. And on that same day, Lil Al would link up with Baby Lane, and both would start drinking heavily, reminiscent on his grandmother's passing. Now, around 3 p.m., both Baby Lane and Al would decide to go get some food at Mom's Burger. Now, as they were getting ready to order their food, they would spot Daniel Smith from the Pocket Hood Compton Crips, who was across the street at the car wash. So once they saw him, they would immediately hop back in the car and drive across the street to confront him. But once they got there, that's when they would realize that Daniel Smith wasn't by himself, but he was with J-Dog and the big OG, Big Stone, both certified shooters from Pocket Hood. Now, once J-Dog saw them pull up, he would immediately start walking towards the truck, and that's when Baby Lane will up his gun and start shooting. He would hit J-Dog twice, who would fall to the ground critically wounded. But J-Dog would still be able to lift his hand up, and he would return fire, striking Baby Lane and Owl. Now, Baby Lane will be hit and will go unconscious behind the steering wheel of the car. And that's when Owl would pick up Baby Lane's gun and start shooting back. But also in the process of shooting back, Big Stone would grab his gun and start shooting at Owl. And at this point in time, it was nothing but a hail of bullets flying everywhere. But by the time all the smoke cleared, both Big Stone and J-Dog were both on the ground. Now, Owl would immediately get the car in gear and drive off, but he wouldn't make it too far because at the time he was losing a lot of blood. And eventually he would crash the car and come to a complete halt. Now, police and EMTs would shortly arrive on scene at the car wash, and other officers would arrive where Owl crashed the truck at. Now, both Owl and Baby Lane will be taken to a nearby hospital, and Baby Lane would die from his injuries not long after. Now, Owl would survive, but J-Dog, who was also wounded, would also be pronounced dead. The next day, police would announce that Big Stone had just died from his injuries. And this is when the police would charge Lil Owl with 3 counts of first-degree murder, which would include the death of his homie, Baby Lane. Now, at the time, the police were still looking for Daniel Smith because they knew he was on scene also. Now, by 1999, they would eventually detain Daniel Smith, who they would bring in for questioning. And Daniel Smith would tell police that both Baby Lane and Owl both opened fire on them while they were at the car wash. Now, Lil Owl would plead not guilty to all 3 of these charges. Now, these charges he was being charged with were not just first-degree murder, but they were under a special circumstance clause of the statute that a jury did not need to determine whether or not the defendant killed deliberately or with premeditation to return a first-degree murder charge verdict, only that a firearm was discharged from a motor vehicle with the intent to kill. Now, during his trial, Daniel Smith would take the stand, and he would testify not only did Lil Owl shoot at them, but he continued to shoot at both Big Stone and J-Dog even after they had both fallen to the ground. And by the end of the trial, Lil Owl would be found guilty of 3 counts of first-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. I would like to thank everybody for tapping in, and I'll see y'all next time.